The shame is we've lived through the greatest period of wealth creation in the history of the world. And most of the gains went to the top 10 or 15 or 20% because we didn't let low and middle working class people put their money into the market. How sinister is that?
Hello, welcome to the episode of the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on another guest who knows a lot about free markets, about public policy, about what's going on across the state and at the federal level. And has been doing this for a long time and is just always brings a lot of good knowledge. And it's none other than Steve Moore. Steve, welcome to Let People Prosper show.
Vance, thanks so much for having me on, and thank you for what you did for the Trump administration in its first term. You were integral in our whole agenda of advancing freedom and free markets and making America prosperous. So I hope to see you back in Washington in a year's time when Trump wins again.
Hey, there you go. There you go. Well, I appreciate all the conversations we had and the insights that you brought. I've learned so much from you over the years, so it's really a pleasure to have you on the show. Before we get into all this, we got a lot to talk about, but let me read your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So Steve Moore is an economist and an author, serving as a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation and a co-founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. He is a frequent lecturer to audiences around the world on the United States economy and political outlook, and is the author of 6 books, including Trumponomics, Inside the America First Plan to Revive Our Economy, and an upcoming book that we're going to talk about here today. He is a graduate of the University of Illinois and holds a Master of Arts in Economics from George Mason University. From 1994 to 2004, he served as the founder and president of the Club for Growth, which I'm now a fellow of the Club for Growth Fellowship that's going on. And he's done so much more. He worked a lot on different presidential campaigns and behind the scenes on public policies. You'll read about him in the Wall Street Journal, see him on Fox, and so many more. And so I'll leave that in the show notes page because you've got so much background, Steve. But let's go ahead and just jump right into it. The first question that I do for all my guests is, why do you do what you do every day?
Well, that's an interesting question. Sometimes I wonder that myself. But I've really been in this now for 40 years, believe it or not. I came to Washington in late 1983. And so that's 40 years I've been in this business. I was really very honored and blessed to have worked for two of the greatest presidents of the last 50 years, Reagan and Trump. And look, I believe, as you do, in the importance of prosperity and free markets. And I've always been pretty libertarian in my viewpoint that government, which governs least, governs best. And so I've always wanted to advance that philosophy in Washington and on college campuses and schools and through the media, through programs like yours. So I think you're having a tremendous impact with what you do, Vance. And as I said, I think if we can win this election and come back with a second round of Trumponomics, I think it'll be hugely beneficial for the American people. Yeah. And so I've got my fingers crossed.
Excellent, excellent. And I just want to unpack that a little bit more from what brought you from whenever you grew up and everything. Were you always interested in economics, or what really got you into economics?
Well, life is so full of surprises, and it's the fickle finger of fate. But my senior year at the University of Illinois, I met a professor of economics there named Julian Simon, who some of your viewers probably know who Julian Simon was. Others may not. He died about 20 years ago. But he was a giant in the economics field. He was what they call a doomslayer. All of the crazy apocalyptic predictions that the left was making about running out of energy and running out of food and running out of farmland and overpopulation and climate change. This climate change issue is not new. It's been around for 50 years. And Julian really showed that the ultimate resource on the planet is really the human mind, and that ingenuity is what creates all of the things that we have. And it always outpaces the depletion of resources. So it changed my whole perspective. And Julian brought me out to the Heritage Foundation in 1984 as his research assistant. And I guess I've been here in the swamp ever since.
I know you've went through a lot of battles Steve. Good ones, bad ones, and everything in between. And now you have a lot of other great economists who have worked for you over time, E.J. Antoni and others that are just fantastic. And so there's a lot of good things that are going on. And I wonder, something you mentioned about having more of a libertarian view, and I'm a classical liberal. I'm a lowercase libertarian, if you will. What are usually some of your assumptions about how the world works and everything else? I'd love to hear those.
Well, I really do believe, as Reagan said, that government is not the solution; government is the problem. And Reagan, you asked me about my past.
Yeah.
I think 1980 was. I remember that debate that Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan had when Reagan, I didn't know much about politics at that time. Like any 21, 22-year-old, I wasn't really very involved or interested in politics. But I listened to what Reagan had to say about the freedom movement. And I thought, oh my gosh, I agree with everything he just said. So I think Reagan, obviously, as with so many millions and millions of people, really turned me into a Republican. I'm not, you've known me a long time, Vance. I'm not a rah-rah Republican. I'm not a big fan of, some of the tariffs that are being talked about. I am worried, as you just mentioned, about this trend towards big government conservatism, which I think is hopelessly naive. We have to be about lower taxes, less regulation, sound money, free trade, and balanced budgets. And, those are things that are just so commonsensical. And, I've been lucky in my life, by the way, because I've really met so many. I met F.A. Hayek. I was pretty close to Milton Freeman towards the end of his life. I've met Tom Sowell. And these are giants, Bill Buckley. I, in a very little way, I'm trying to, pass on their messages to not just the American people, but to the rest of the world. I remember one time, Vance, I went to, with the Cato Institute, we took Milton Freeman to Mexico. Mexico is a pretty poor country, and we went to Mexico City. And my God, the thousands and thousands of people who showed up to see Milton Freeman. He was just a guiding light to so many of the people in the world. So sometimes when we think people aren't listening to us, I think they really are.
Yeah. Wow. That's touching. But Milton Freeman is my favorite economist. He's what got me going. I remember I was in intermediate macroeconomics at Texas Tech University, and my professor, he ended up being my mentor, Dr. Ronald Gilbert. He passed away a few years ago. But after one of the classes, I would go and talk to him after every class, and he was free market in a Keynesian sort of in a Keynesian department, and he handed me Capitalism and Freedom, and he said, "You got to read this." And it changed my mind, Steve. I mean, it was like, because you and I've talked a lot over the years, and I was a drummer in a rock band, and I wasn't into politics, but I knew that economics just seemed to tell more about how the world worked. And when I started reading this stuff and everything, it really just blew my mind. And it tells the story of human prosperity. I mean, free market capitalism really is the best path to prosperity. I know Larry Kudlow has talked about that for so long, and I love watching his show, and I know y'all are good friends, and we work together at the White House. But we've got to get back to that. There's too little talked about capitalism and the way that it sets up the institutional framework for people to prosper instead of this top-down approach that comes about. And so I wonder, with you being in the swamp, I'm in Texas, with you being in the swamp and everything, what are you seeing about what's happening with Trump and J.D. Vance? Just to be honest, I'm a little bit concerned about some of the things with J.D. Vance, with the national conservatism. And I think some of his story with Hillbilly Elegy, I'm right on board with that. In fact, I grew up poor. I came from rags to riches in many ways. I lived with my grandma for a couple of years as well. But I'm interested to hear what some of your thoughts are of being, some boots on the ground there in D.C.
Well, obviously, we're up against a pretty sinister force, and what Biden and Kamala Harris are talking about. The big change I've seen in my 40 years in Washington has been the almost thorough, complete left-wing takeover of the Democratic Party. When I came to Washington, Republicans and Democrats were not that far apart. I mean, I was a Republican, but we used to work together with people like Dick Gephardt and Sam Nunn and people like Bill Bradley and so many Democrats that Pat Schroeder, on some issues. That just doesn't happen anymore because the Democrats are so way out there. Now, look, though, it's true the Republican Party has moved to the right in terms of more of a free market position, but the Democrats have just abandoned any pretense of being a party that cares about the middle. They are totally consumed with government power, and it's sad. I mean, it's Bernie Sanders' party.
Yeah.
And what's scary is that Kamala Harris voted to the left of, Kamala was to the left of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So she is a true blue, dyed-in-the-wool San Francisco liberal Democrat. I don't think too many people in Texas want to see that in the White House.
No.
And I think at the end of the day, I don't think many Americans really want to see that either.
Yeah.
She's a very weak candidate. The only weaker candidate than Kamala would have been Joe Biden. It's sad, actually, that the Democrats have moved that way. Now I see the Republicans starting to move in this kind of populist, what they call national conservatism movement. And, Vance, I was out privileged to go to the Reagan Library about 3 weeks ago. You've probably been to the Reagan Library. Right? And if you haven't been there, folks, you've got to go. It's such an inspiring thing. Anytime you're in the Los Angeles area or Southern California, you've got to go to the Reagan Library. And it's incredibly inspiring. And, the big chunk of the Berlin Wall is there. And people forget that Reagan, what's the old saying? Reagan brought down the Berlin Wall without firing a shot.
Yeah.
And so, Reagan was the North Star for what we as principled Republicans and free marketeers believed in. But now there's this kind of movement of we have to move beyond Reaganism. Like, well, why?
Yeah.
Why would we want to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, it was, now look, Reagan wasn't perfect by any means. Oftentimes he did things I didn't like, but for the most part, it was very, very successful administration that made America strong and prosperous. And the world economic superpower, and created a prosperity that really lasted for 40 years.
Yeah.
So let's stay on that path. Why would we start to embrace forced unionism? Why would we ever support higher tax rates? Why would we think that, in these, these industrial, the Midwestern industrial states, and I'm from one, I'm from Illinois, but, big government isn't going to save Illinois or Ohio or Michigan or Pennsylvania. That's crazy.
Yeah.
The only thing that will save them is more freedom. And look at the South now. I mean, the South used to be the poorest region in the country. Now it's the richest region in the country because they've adopted free market, free trade, right to work policies, low tax rates, all the things that we believe in. And that has to be the agenda for the country. And Republicans need to get behind it. And it's like new Coke. We don't need new Coke.
Right.
Coke was fine the way it was, right?
That's right. I totally agree with that. But yeah, so I think all those things are really important. Whenever you're talking to legislators or governors or presidential candidates and everything else, what are some of the key talking points or key policy initiatives that should go forward to let people prosper?
Well, I have three priorities that I think are most important right now. One of them is I really believe the biggest issue for our country right now is school choice and letting every child, attend the best school that they can possibly go to, create competition in the education industry. Competition works in every other industry. Why not in education? And we cannot continue to, no matter what, if we get all the other policies right, but we're graduating kids from high school who can't even read their diploma, it's not going to work. We need the most advanced, highly skilled, highly trained, smartest kids that will be, run this country in the next generation. We're not doing that. People who go to the elite schools are, but, we're leaving so many kids behind. And this is a no-brainer to me. Every kid, I don't care if they're white, green, yellow, black, brown. I don't care who their parents are. I don't care what their income is. Everyone should have access to a great school. And I don't know if you agree with me on that, but I do. You can tell I feel passionate. And I know Texas, you're making some good strides on that. And I know you've been a voice on that. So that would be one. Just let's really rethink our whole education system and let freedom prevail there. Second of all, I think, I'm a flat tax guy. I believe that the lowest possible rates with the fewest loopholes is the best system. And we could get our rates down to 18 or 19%, as Steve Forbes has talked about. One of my other great mentors was Dick Armey, who was also from Texas.
Yep.
And, was one of the originals in Congress to embrace that idea. I worked for Dick Armey, and that was something I'm proud of as well. So that would be can you imagine if the United States had an 18% tax rate? Nobody in the world would be able to compete with us. And then finally, I'm spending a lot of my time now trying to move towards a system of personal accounts for Social Security. So every young person in America could take 12% of their paycheck and put it into a 401k plan and an index fund. And think about this, Vance, that in 1983, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was a little over 1,000. Now it's over 40,000. So imagine if we had let, someone like myself, I just turned 64. If I'd been able to put, say, 10 or 11 or 12% of my paycheck into an index fund, my average next year or whenever I, retire, hopefully it'll be much more longer than that.
Yeah.
But if I were to retire next year, I'd be eligible for retirement. I could get about $1,800 a month check from the government. Wait a minute. If I had put that into a 401k plan and just turned it into an annuity, I wouldn't be getting $1,800. I'd be getting $10,000 a month. I think Republicans are making this idiotic, stupid argument that Social Security benefits are too high. No, they're not. They're not too high. They're way too low. Mm-hmm. We're ripping off generation after generation. And that's got to stop now. I mean, I want my kids who are in their 20s to be able to put that money, and I'd make it voluntarily, by the way. If you want to stay in the old system, you can. But in this new system, I mean, my gosh, even a minimum wage worker would get 3 times as much money, and they'd be able to save for their children when they die, $1 or $2 million.
Yeah.
So why don't we do that? It's so infuriating to me. By the way, if you did that, every additional hour you worked, every additional week you worked, every additional year you worked, you'd have more money in your account.
Yep.
So you're rewarding people for working. Social Security doesn't do that. There's no compound interest. It's just a pay-as-you-go system. So that would be one of my top priorities as well.
That's fantastic. And would that also be a part of the universal savings program?
Sure.
Because you've been talking about that for a while, like Adam Michelle and some others over time. I think that's also a really good idea.
Well, one of the things I really like about, these personal accounts and universal savings is we want every American to be a worker capitalist. Yeah. You know this from being an economic major that, the whole Marxian idea was that there's some fundamental conflict between capital and labor. Mm. No, they're not. They go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And what we want is every worker to be a worker, but also a capitalist. And we want every American worker to own Google, to own NVIDIA, to own General Electric and General Motors and every company, so that when America does better, every worker does better. The shame is we've lived through the greatest period of wealth creation in the history of the world. And most of the gains went to the top 10 or 15 or 20% because we didn't let low and middle working class people put their money into the market. How sinister is that?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think those are
these are but these are the same people who talk about income and wealth inequality.
Right.
I mean, how hypocritical is that? So we say, okay, let's let everybody own things. Oh, no, we can't do that. That's too risky.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think you're right on I think the school choice is important. I mean, human capital, I think that's going to help our next revolution because we need smarter kids. We need more investment and everything else. And, we're spending all this money on K through 12 education and we're getting poor outcomes. There's no correlation between increases in spending and increase in outcomes. In fact, it's a negative correlation if you think about it that way. And so we need to have universal school choice. Texas, I hope will happen. It will happen in 2025. With all the elections that just took place in the primaries here, I see that happening. And I think you're right. We need flat income taxes. I'm glad that Texas has no personal income tax, along with other 6 other states.
You have a flat tax of 0, right?
That's right. That's right. And I think also we need a spending revolution, a sustainable budgeting revolution, to where I remember you and I were talking when I was in the White House, and we were talking about deficits, and you're like, look, Vance, deficits don't matter. And I was like, what do you mean? And you're like, well, it's spending. Spending is the problem. And so I really have been championing the idea of a spending crisis. We've got to get control of this spending crisis. And to your point about private savings accounts would help with that. Because Social Security is contributing to this. Medicare is contributing to this. Mm-hmm. And if we don't touch those things, this spending crisis is going to continue to create higher interest rates, larger balance sheets for the Federal Reserve, and a devalued dollar that's going to hurt. All these things are going to continue to hurt us with inflation and everything else. And so we've got to get Trump and them to really start talking, I hope, about reining in government spending sooner rather than later. Don't you think?
Sure. I mean, as Milton Freeman taught us, spending is taxation. Yep. So you either pay the piper now or you pay later with interest. And of course, we need to rein in spending. And there, look, you and I could probably balance the budget in about 15 minutes. I mean, you got $300 billion of a green energy slush fund. Okay, we can eliminate that. Yep. We've got another $150 billion did you know there's $150 billion of COVID money that still wasn't spent?
Oh,
so
yeah.
Biden wants to spend that. Okay, no, we're going to cancel that. We'll get rid of a lot of the agencies that are no longer necessary. we could put as my friend Rand Paul, my favorite senator in Kentucky, says, if we just go back to the baseline of spending we had before COVID, we'd have a balanced budget. So it's not that hard. And then you get growth. If you get growth up, my God, you'll get 8-10% increase of revenues, and we'll actually have a budget surplus.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating. And this shouldn't be a partisan issue. Remember, Clinton said the era of big government's over. And there was a lot of movement. Of course, Newt Gingrich was critical on that. And so Clinton just went along with it. But he had some underlying free trade and other ideas that are out there. But to your point earlier, I mean, the Kamala Harris, the Bidens of the world, the AOCs, they just don't seem to be getting any of that anymore because they want control over people. They don't want liberty and freedom. They want control over them, right?
Yeah, it is sad. I mean, I had dinner a few months ago with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And, he's a fascinating guy. It's interesting. He's right, Vance, on half the issues and wrong on the other half, which makes him better than most Democrats, because most Democrats are wrong on 100% of the issues. But he's a fascinating guy, and we talked about tax cuts, and he said, I said, if you were president, would you support a tax rate cut? And he said, yeah, I learned from my uncle. Remember, it was John F. Kennedy who cut tax rates and proposed the big tax cut of the 1960s. And so, and by the way, John F. Kennedy was also free trade. He was pro-life. Today, John F. Kennedy would be a Republican.
Yep.
There's no doubt about it.
Yep.
Bill Clinton was a true, honest, new Democrat who believed in balanced budgets. Yep. He believed in free trade. We cut the capital gains tax. Now, he did some things I don't like, but, the most fiscally responsible president of the last 50 years was Bill Clinton. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. Now, he had help from people like Newt Gingrich. You're right about that. But still, I mean, that's a pretty impressive record. Yeah. The only time we've had balanced budgets is when Bill Clinton was in the White House.
That's exactly right.
But by the way, Democrats, they don't look happily they think Bill Clinton was a sellout.
Yeah.
They didn't support his welfare reform. They didn't support his capital gains tax cut. They didn't support his balanced budgets. That party has just gone over a cliff. It's sad.
Yeah, I agree. And, something else that's been interesting to see is the blue states versus red states. And I know you love talking about this stuff, and I want to give you the opportunity to do so. But this out-migration from the blue states to the in-migration of the red states, places like Texas, where I'm at, or Florida, leaving Illinois, where you grew up, or California, I think shows the beauty of federalism and this laboratory of competition that we have. We need more of that. And I think states should lead more. One of the things I think Trump was big on, or I know he was he wanted to give more power back to the states and to the people. And I think that would be a historic measure for us to take at this time. Don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And, when you ask me about the most important, reforms that we need, look, I mean, this is not a happy thing to say, but America is two countries today. We are two countries. We're a red state America and blue state America. And, if you're in California and then you move to Texas, you might as well be in a different country.
Yeah.
They're just so different, both in terms of philosophy, in terms of lifestyle, culture, in every way. So I've been really pondering this. How do we keep this? How do we prevent another civil war? I mean, we're probably as ideologically, divided today as any time since the 1860s. And it's not a healthy thing. And so how do we prevent violence? By the way, I'm very worried if Trump wins. I think there's going to be violence in cities across America. I think could get really ugly.
Yeah.
I thought a lot about this, Vance, and I think the only way we could make it work is to go back to the ingeniousness of our founding fathers, who really, it's these United States of America, these United States. The federal government was created by the states. Yep. The states created the federal government. The federal government didn't. The federal government acts as if the states are their subjugates. And so what I'm saying is, if we want to make this American experiment continue to work over the next, several decades, we need a kind of radical federalism, moving all sorts of power and decision-making back to the states. If California wants to have carbon taxes, if they want to require electric vehicles, if they want to, have abortion on demand, whatever the issue, fine. Yeah. Go to California, live there. If you want, more freedom on your own, guns, and you want you can go to this. Now, obviously, we have we have civil liberties in this country that are protected in all states. But within that broad framework, why does the federal government have to have so much power? Why can't states decide in a way that could, make us again. I don't have a problem with what people in California want to do.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that. It's their state, and if you want to live there,
yeah.
You can do those things. But why don't they let us do what we want to do in our states?
Right. That's exactly right. I always love talking with you, Steve. In the last few minutes we have here together, you got a new book coming out. What's that all about, and what's the name of it, and what's it about?
Well, funny quick story about this, Vance, is that the original title of this book was Trumponomics 2.0 because Arthur Laffer and I had written, the book in 2018 called Trumponomics. And so we thought, well, we'll have to do a new version of this. And we were talking, we interviewed Donald Trump quite a bit for the book. And in one of the, meetings, he said, well, what's the title of this book going to be? And we said Trumponomics 2.0. And he kind of frowned. He said, I don't like that. He said, call it the greatest economic recovery in American history. And then someone else said, well, why don't we just call it the Trump economic miracle? And he smiled and he said, I love that. So that's the title. And it was an economic miracle. Yeah. You and so many of the people over there, Brooke Rollins and, all of the rest of the great people in the Reagan administration with Larry Kudlow and others. It was really, it was a miracle. Yeah. And we had so much prosperity. And I think you do, that within 100 days or at least 6 months, we can get this whole situation turned around. I think it's going to be like taking a champagne bottle and shaking it up and popping that cork. I think it's going to just explode with growth. And all you have to do is just get the government the hell out of the way. It's not that complicated.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, I'm hopeful that that's the case. And I think folks like us, Steve, who have our ears to what's going on, that talk to a lot of people who used to be in the administration, maybe in the new administration. Hopefully we can help keep the new right, the national conservative stuff going too far. I think we helped some of that from the tariffs and things in the first administration. And we're going to see a lot of that in the second administration, hopefully. But I think we can help rein that in a little bit by highlighting the benefits of deregulation, making the Trump tax cuts permanent. And I think there's actually some reforms that can make it even better. Get rid of a lot of the loopholes and deductions and just broadening the base and lowering the rate, but at least make those permanent. Rein in government spending, and we'll have an economic juggernaut on our hands where people can work again and people can thrive again and not feel like we're in a recession, no matter what the economic indicators are saying from the Biden administration, that 52% of Americans feel like we're in a recession today. That's just a telling of the situation that we're in, because they're saying, look, we're better than we were during the Trump years. That's just nonsense. Now, we could talk about the lockdowns and what impact that had on the economy of COVID. But before that, everything was booming. Lowest unemployment rates, highest labor force participation rates, all the benefits that could come again. And so I'm hopeful that we can do these things. So, but what would you like to leave us, Steve, as we close out today?
Well, I think that the free market always prevails. You're seeing what's going on in the rest of the world. Not only is this freedom movement so critical to the United States, but really to every other country, because when we get it right, as Reagan proved, when we got it right, guess what? The rest of the world followed suit. Yeah. When we get it wrong, unfortunately, the rest of the world goes over a cliff, as we do. And Joe Biden says, well, gee, we're growing faster than any other country. That's because all the other countries are, it's like a turtle versus a tortoise, Yeah. We get it right. Our best duty and role in the world, as Reagan said, I hate to keep, reciting him, but he was always so right. Yeah. We have to lead by example. Lead by example. We don't need foreign aid. Our greatest foreign aid is the ideas that we export to the rest of the world, when those ideas are freedom and free enterprise.
Yep. Amen. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Steve. Thank you for joining me on the Let People Prosper Show, and God bless you and your family.
You too. Thank you, Vance.
Thank you so much, Steve. Well, for the audience, thank you for listening today. Go out and give us a 5-star rating. Share this with your friends and family. We've got a lot to do in the next few years. You don't want to be left behind. You can find all the show notes at vanceginn.substack.com, or just go to vanceginn.com and you can get all this. God bless you and your family, and let people prosper.